Uh, This is Jim Elliott here from Editorial Director of Publishers Weekly, and welcome to the Frankfurt Market Insight panel on what's going on in the United States in this most unusual year. I'm going to open up things with a brief overview of what's been going on in the American market in terms of sales, and then we have three panelists who will follow up, and we can dig in deeper into some of the big issues that have been going on here, as well as the sales pattern. And to sum up very quickly, sales in the United States have gone much better than people thought they were going to back in the early days of the pandemic that hit here in March and the beginning of April. When things first started to get bad, we saw retailers across the board start to close down due to the lockdowns that were imposed. Publishers were delaying their titles from the spring into the fall and beyond that. There were some publishers doing some furloughs, and the early prognosis was pretty grim. But as it turns out, the bottom never really fell out of the market. And so up through the middle of September, print sales based on BookScan data was actually up 6% over that same period in 2019. And that was due to a couple of things. First of all, there was tremendous growth in the juvenile nonfiction segment, where parents were scurrying to buy all kinds of books and other materials for the kids who were suddenly homeschooling at home. So they were looking for both educational books and as well as books that can keep the kids entertained while they do their best to make it through home learning. And so that segment sales have been phenomenally well and up about 29% in terms of units up through last week. And juvenile fiction didn't do too bad either, up about 10%. And there they've had a couple of blockbusters from some long-time, well-established authors that have been released this year to the big numbers, selling about 1 million copies each. And that's from Suzanne Collins of Hunger Games and Stephanie Meyer from Twilight, and some new books in there. And then, of course, another of all this was you can't get enough political books this year. And they have done really well. All Things Trump has attracted interest. Actually, and so far, the best-selling print book of the year has been Mary Trump's book about her uncle, Too Much and Never Enough. That has sold well over 1 million copies. And in just the last few weeks, we've had Bob Woodward's Rage, Michael Cohen's Disloyal, all hitting the bestseller list. So that's been a steady seller as well. It's something nobody had really counted on that, earlier on in the year. And then probably the final subject area that's done, very well has been books on social justice and that sort of thing. That saw a lot of interest begin after the death of George Floyd. That segment has had steady sellers, driven by a lot of backlist books. And the biggest book seller so far in that whole area has been White Fragility, published by the independent publisher Beacon Press, which has sold roughly 750,000 print copies this year. Certainly a record for anything they've had since that book's come out a number of years ago. And then turning to dollars, the AAP, the Association of American Publishers, they're lacking a little bit in terms of time. The most recent numbers we have are through July, and the whole industry is down 6%, but that's decline is largely due to the educational publishing segments, where there's been, even more uncertainty than there has been in trade over, what's going to happen in the future. And, even though schools are open here, there's still a lot of uncertainty about what's going on. But in terms of dollars, according to the AAP, the adult segment is up about 4.5% through July, and the children's segment was up about 7.5%. So there we see, those numbers are pretty much in concert with what BookScan's been reporting. And in terms of format, people were wondering or if ebook sales would start to pick up, and they in fact have after 3 or 4 years of slumping. They're up about 14% through July. And digital audio, which has been the strongest area in the States for 2 or 3 years now, they had another 15% increase in the first 7 months of the year. So, those are all positive things that nobody was really counting on back in the dark days of April. But it hasn't been all, good news. The segment I think most people are worried about are the independent bookstore outlets. There's no doubt that they've been suffering a lot, especially because of the lockdowns. They've been gradually opening over the course of the summer, and now are getting prepared for the critical fall selling season. Allison Hill, who's the CEO of the ABA, earlier this month, she issued something of a warning saying they had done a recent survey of their members, and a substantial number had been reporting sales is down as much as 40%. And she was pointing out that, the fourth season is always critical. It's going to be even more critical if some of these stores are going to stay open into 2021. And she was asking for publishers and distributors and wholesalers to do what they can to support their local outlets. So that's kind of the big sky picture, if you will. Again, it's been better than anybody thought when this whole thing started. But where things are going to end up is still, I don't think anybody's going to make any predictions on this panel about what's going to happen over the course of the next 3 or 4 months. But I'm going to ask Kelly Gallagher to take a stab at what's going on in the supply chain, and maybe give us a little overview of some of the issues that are out there and how the supply chain is going to work in the fourth quarter. Kelly has been at Ingram Industries for a long time, and now he's VP of Content Acquisition for Ingram. Kelly, floor is yours.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, it's certainly been a year. I think we're all tired of using the word unprecedented for sure. And what's interesting in the trends and the statistics that you cite is while numbers are up and while a variety of things seem to be happening, what's happening below the top line headlines is this shifting landscape that we have seen. And so while numbers are up, it's not predictive of who's up and by how much and what other things are happening. And so some of the things we've been tracking at Ingram about this shifting landscape beyond the top line numbers really relate to our supply chain in the US. And this would be related to publishers that have needed to change their behavior, those who are succeeding, those who are not doing so well. Retail certainly, and then also the print space and what's been happening there. And in a lot of cases, I think what's interesting is 2020 has really accelerated some of the trends that have been probably happening for some time. And so a lot of this is not new, it's just seen a quickening in 2020 because of the COVID situation. If you look at the news headlines, I think I'll just start there. Consumer book buying has changed considerably. So while the numbers are up, why they're up is that consumers have been buying significantly more online. Interesting to that, though, while a lot of the business has moved to consumer direct fulfillment, Amazon has not gained market share in the consumer direct fulfillment space. In fact, the numbers would indicate that they've actually lost some market share to those like Walmart, Target, and some of the newer ones like Bookshop, which has been built to support the independent publishing sector, and so independent retail sector. So it's interesting, when the pandemic first started in the US, Amazon made a very startling announcement that they were not going to be fulfilling for books. It didn't mean they stopped selling books. It just means that they changed their fulfillment methodology to much more of a consumer direct fulfillment model, where they were leaning heavily on either the very largest of publishers to ship direct to consumer or companies like wholesale companies like Ingram. And so we've seen that pattern shift a couple different times with Amazon going from a consumer direct fulfillment model back to a heavy stocked model where they're using a lot of bulk ordering. And then likely in the Q4, they will switch back to a consumer direct fulfillment model as they put more focus on higher margin higher margin products like electronics, and allow the book industry to fulfill direct for itself. So a lot of shifting going on in that whole area. The library market, which has really been a great feeder for the book publishing industry, a lot of change happening there, and none of that good, I would say. There were over 3,000 libraries that were forced to close during COVID, and budgets for urban libraries have been reduced by as much as 20 to 25%. And so, again, a very shifting landscape as far as where and how we can source books and content. I think another key area to keep an eye on is the whole supply chain related to new titles and large reprints. The print industry obviously had issues going on before COVID. We know with printers like Edwards Brothers last year that went out of business. This year, LSC filing for Chapter 11, and both LSC and Quad closing print plants. There's been a real compression on print availability in the publishing space. We see that continuing into Q4 for a couple different reasons. Number one, there's just less print capacity. Number two, there is likely going to be several large bestsellers that will be launching, the least of which is President Obama's book. But then also many publishers who postponed their spring and summer titles and are now launching those in the fall and into next year. And so there's going to be a lot of demand and continued demand, and we're already seeing it at our Lightning Source company. A lot of publishers that are trying to solve for how they get their books into the market space with a reduced print availability, but also this compressed selling cycle. And that's probably the last point I would make is, looking into Q4, there's a lot of factors going into how well we're going to be able to perform for Q4. There's certainly the consumer demand. We think there's going to continue to be consumer demand, but their buying habits we know are going to change. Every major election cycle we see typically the week prior, the week of, and the week after a significant downturn in overall POS sales. And so this happening right at the heart of the Christmas buying season that a lot of publishers and retailers are hoping to get their make back for a down year is really going to be a challenge. We don't know also if that's going to extend for another couple weeks if an election is in doubt. We certainly don't hope that's a reality, and I'm not trying to broadcast anything that I would know that nobody else would, but there's a real challenge with that. There is going to be a compressed selling cycle in Q4, and then ultimately our ability to deliver product to consumers' doorsteps. We know that UPS, FedEx are already starting to pre-warn their customers that they can expect extended ship and delivery times. And so with a compressed buying season and consumers typically holding off, we may see a lot of books coming to delivered to people after the holiday season. And so, there's a lot of question with all of this. Again, I'm still rather bullish on the overall sales potential, but a lot of shifting sands right now, if you look just one level below. And so it'll be interesting to see that from the U.S. perspective.
All right, Kelly, great. Thanks for, delving into some of what's going on behind the scenes. So next up, we'll have Peter Hildek-Smith. Peter's the founder of the Codex Group, which is probably the best known research firm for book publishers, especially when it comes to audience development and that sort of thing. So Peter, what's your viewpoint?
Okay, well, it just so happens it's a very good timing because we just finished our most recent national book buyer survey last week. We interviewed just under 4,000 past month adult book buyers. And so what I thought I'd do is just take a couple of minutes and show some of the highlights of what we're seeing so far. It's preliminary, but hopefully give you some perspective from the book buyer standpoint, complementing Kelly's supply chain view. So let me just pull this up and show you what we're seeing.
There we go. Looks good to me.
There we go. Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, in trying to get a better handle on why or how COVID is affecting the industry, we wanted to kind of take a big step back and first say, okay, what's happening with book buyer consumer confidence overall? You know, what's happening in their personal home household economy? How are they looking at the overall U.S. economy, and what is their sort of overall buying mood? Then look at COVID-19 from a health perspective and how it's actually affecting book buyers. Look at their personal priorities for entertainment and other individual activities, and then look at retail channel, book format. I think a lot of questions that you guys have already touched on ebook. Everybody's saying, is this the next inflection point in ebook sales? And then lastly, some new information on book market racial equity. So let me just go through that quickly here. So this is a consumer confidence level metric that we benchmarked against the national US measure. And if you look at this measure, you know, in the June 2009, after the 2008 recession, it hit rock bottom at 23. So for perspective, you know, looking at September 2020, the gray bar for all US consumers is 50. So the mood, the general sentiment of US consumers is a lot more robust than in the depths of the 2008 recession and its aftermath. Book buyers, the white bar, are about 13% lower as consumers. So that's largely due to a different view of how the US economy is performing. On the left, looking at our September book buyer numbers in white, it's got a score of about 23, positively affirming that the US economy is in a good or excellent position. So that's not very good. It's better than it was back in our prior study in April. Personal finances, book buyers are feeling a little less comfortable, but still about 60% are in the positive zone on their own personal finances. Buying climate, is this a good time to buy the things you need or want? Close to 50%, so that's pretty good. And then in the future, over a 6-month horizon, they're feeling, you know, more good things are going to come along there. So overall, I don't think there's anything super alarming about what we're seeing just in terms of overall consumer confidence. Certainly a good bit below where it was, you know, in fourth quarter of 2019, but nothing falling out of bed. So if we look at COVID health, do you personally know anyone who's tested positive for COVID-19? This includes your family and your close friends. For book buyers, about 22% higher than the overall US population surveyed. About 44% say either they, a close family member, or a close friend have actually tested positive for COVID. And then just for fun, given last night's shenanigans on the debate, we put in some party affiliation numbers too. For whatever reason, registered Democrats feel or are experiencing a higher level of positive COVID testing in their immediate family than registered Republicans are. So COVID is real. COVID is costing jobs. 51% of adult book buyers in the US say that they, close family member or close friends, have been laid off from work due to COVID-19. Again, higher with registered Democrats than Republicans. And COVID kills. This statistic was really surprising. 23% of past month book buyers are saying either a close family member or friend has actually died from COVID. So it's a pretty stark reminder that this is very real. It's nearly 1 in 4. Much higher, 54% higher than US adults overall from a study that was completed the same day we closed our study. And again, Democrats are outpacing Republicans on that very unhappy metric. And then just to bring it all home, COVID's not going away anytime soon because the overall attitude towards taking a coronavirus vaccine once it becomes available is not very positive. Overall, US citizens, only 36% are saying that they will take a vaccine when it's available. 28% say no, and the balance are not sure. The good news is book buyers, 54% higher, are much more willing to take the vaccine, but again, it's still only 56%. And then, as you'd expect, there's a party shift there where Democrats are much more likely to take the vaccine than Republicans. But I will say, compared to the general population, book buying registered Republicans are a lot more tuned into this than the general US population. So book buyers are paying attention, they're following the news, they're up to date on what's going on, and I think they're making a much more concerted effort to try and overcome what COVID is throwing our way. In terms of personal priorities, we regularly ask book buyers what their most important leisure activities are. So on an overall basis, in the September just concluded research, 85% saying, whatever my personal activity is, it could be reading, it could be gardening, it could be just about anything. That's their sort of the benchmark at 85%. Reading books is just below that at 69%, up slightly from our April study. People are maybe getting a little battle fatigued watching so much streaming video. That's down a tick. Listening to popular music, slightly down. Social networking and listening to audiobooks is pretty stable overall as an activity that is a favorite activity or personal priority. So these are their most important activities, what they really value and treasure. So I think what we can take away from this is reading books is fundamental to who a book buyer is. It's how they self-actualize. It's what they're about as people. It's what they value. So when times get tough, and as we've seen in the numbers that you cited, Jim, and you as well, Kelly, book buyers read more books. They engage more. And we're seeing them tell us that in a very good way, as well as buying more books. So that's all extremely positive. And then what's also interesting is the longer your community has been affected by COVID, as you go from left to less time affected to more time, 6 months or more affected, people actually are saying reading books is more important to them, whereas a little bit down over time with filmed entertainment, popular music, and audiobook listening being a real priority for them. So I don't think we have any worry that people are going to be reading less books due to COVID. In fact, it's just the opposite. In terms of retail channel shift, Kelly touched on this as well. We're seeing the mix between ebook sellers, online print sellers, and physical store sellers on a unit basis. Ebooks are pretty stable, no major shifts there. Online print is up. Clearly, online has benefited dramatically from COVID. And then, no surprise, physical stores are down about almost 10%. That number has two different things going on there. You're seeing a lot of growth in terms of the major mass merchant retailers, Target, Walmart, but you're seeing a lot more decline with indies and Barnes & Noble down 20, 25% on a unit basis in terms of market share in the September numbers, August, September numbers that we have. So not as much change in mix as you would expect, given all the incredible things that have been going on in the marketplace. But I think the question that we've been getting the most is, are ebooks now having their new inflection point? And this is suggesting perhaps not. So on book format impact, we ask people, what's your current personal preference for reading books in print versus digital? And so pre-COVID, back in October of 2019, just under 64% said they read ebooks, period. We're just a little bit higher, 2% higher now in September than we were a year ago. So again, not a big change in core behavior, not a big change in sort of format orientation. And in terms of those who are really reading a lot of ebooks, the light gray to dark gray, we've gone from 4% reading ebooks exclusively to 5%. And for people reading equal or more even P, we've gone up about almost 1.5%. So again, not a big change. Some of those people who are curious to try ebooks a year ago have now moved into ebooks. And the print-only number is virtually the same, just under 29. So that's what's going on there in terms of consumption. And then this is, again, very preliminary information looking at channel mix by race. So Caucasian white book buyers have about the same ebook unit share as African-American book buyers do. Hispanic Latino, a lot less, 26% less than white book buyers. Online print is very much in the Caucasian white market, but much less strong. in the other areas. And physical stores, and this is I think the key headline here, African American Black book buyers, almost 37% of what they bought in the last month on a unit basis was in physical stores, and Hispanic Latino, almost 42%. So, as we're looking for more racial equity in the book industry, we really need to expand physical store distribution pretty dramatically to be able to reach and really expand with these under-supported audiences. And then the last point I'll make is at the top, you can see Amazon's group share. That includes Amazon stores, Amazon.com, and Kindle. White book buyers, just over 53%, African American, 37%, and Hispanic Latino, only 35%. So there's got to be a lot less reliance on Amazon to get books to all these markets, and a lot more focus on physical stores, and that's not indies, it's other channels. So that's it for, one last point. We also did some work on book buyers as effect on politics, and I'm happy to say that book buyers are 30% more likely to vote in the 2020 presidential election than general U.S. residents. So book buyers are better informed and they're more engaged. So that's it for what we're seeing right now. Let's turn this on.
All right, great, Peter. Thanks a lot. That was terrific. Okay, and now we're moving on to our final speaker, and then we'll have some internal discussion here. And Tanya McKinnon is the founder of McKinnon Literary Agency. She specializes in nonfiction that addresses cultural issues as well as gender, race, class, ethnicity, and sexuality. So Tanya, going to move away from some of the numbers and just to get your overall viewpoint on what you think has been going on and what has, certainly been a different year.
I'm so glad to be a part of this panel. This was like a mini seminar and incredibly useful in terms of how I talk to marketing about my authors. I opened the doors to my agency 6 years ago. My agency is obviously Black owned and feminist identified. My clients tend to be thought leaders, academics. I represent people like Michael Eric Dyson, who's a New York Times bestseller, and Brittany Cooper, who's a New York Times bestseller. This fall I have, BLM co-founder Alicia Garza's book coming out. I represent Martha Jones, whose book Vanguard just published. So, and a lot of other people that I'm missing right off the bat. But Robin Kelly. But I have noticed a shift since the beginning of COVID. So obviously since the election of Trump in 2016, there was an uptick in interest in books about politics. I think books that helped us maybe understand how Trump happened, helped us to understand who our fellow American citizens are and how it is that they're making the choices that they're making. And I think there was a turn definitely to Black thought leaders, to feminist thought leaders of every race, right? To people who'd been thinking for some time, to academics in particular who could straddle the line between academic research and trade writing, people who could really address the zeitgeist and who could help us contextualize historically how to understand this moment. So I saw an uptick in demand for my clients and the kind of work that they do. And it's a personal passion of mine, so it dovetailed. When COVID first hit, I think for about 4 weeks maybe, we kind of were pulling our hair out and going, what's going to happen? And then George Floyd happened. And then the demand for my clients went through the roof, essentially. I've been busier now during this COVID period than I've ever been. It's interesting what you had to say, Jim, about the juvenile nonfiction market. I've made a couple of major deals with existing clients. We haven't announced them yet. I suppose I could announce here.
Tell us first.
So for Amani Perry, for Michael Eric Dyson, for Brittany Cooper, right? And, for all of them, in a sense, speaking in progressive ways about the experience of race and American citizenship. So I think that, you know, definitely there has been a hunger for the perspective that my clients bring. In the adult market, it's been equally robust. I've made a huge number of sales this year. And some people have said that it reminds them this period of 1999. Now, I was around in 1999 and I was agenting, you know, at an agency. I didn't have my own agency then, but I remember that period in publishing where they hired a lot of Black editors and they opened some Black imprints, and there was this sort of sudden discovery that Black people read and we could market books to them. And, you know, the thing, and that's great. It's great when there are these, you know, these sudden discoveries that, you know, people of color matter and their thoughts and ideas are useful to the national discourse. If I had one worry in this period, is that this is a trend and not a sort of new establishing norm. I would hope that what we see is that the experience of writers of color, of members of LGBTQ community, of people who are marginalized historically in different ways, that their voices are being invited into the mainstream because their voices are valuable and because their voices help us understand the mainstream, not because we're niche, not because the perspective that we bring pertains only to a percentage or a smaller percentage of the American population. I think, and more than think, I believe, that the experience of African American writers, of Latinx writers, of Asian American writers, of queer writers, of feminist writers of all colors, this is the American experience. I think that, as you know, we're looking at a 2042 demographic shift. So I think we're a stronger nation. I think that we are intellectually more robust. I think we're more capable of meeting the moments that are going to come toward us if we read more work about the experience of marginalized people in this country, people who have been historically marginalized, and about how people who have experiences that are outside of a sort of usually educationally privileged white experience, how they're understanding what's going on in America and how they're understanding their neighbors. I think that this is going to be critical moving forward. I'm excited to see that more and more people are being hired in publishing right now, like Dana Kennedy at Simon & Schuster, Lisa Lucas, today the good news of Jamia Wilson, you know, and I think there are more people, more editors who are going to be hired. It's not just about selling books. It's about having representation across the board in publishing. I mean, I think this Codex presentation that you gave, Peter, was stunning. I mean, in that you're saying that we're buying from brick and mortar stores. I mean, is that not what you just told? I mean, that's
exactly, yeah, very different.
What does that mean? It means that we're also bolstering the economy in really important ways, you know, and I think that to understand buyers of, you know, book consumers of color as being crucial, I think, to the ongoing success of print editions, also possibly to certain forms of indie bookstores. I mean, it's sad to me to think that indie existence is in jeopardy. When I was in college, I had the great privilege, and some of you will remember it, of working for a bookstore in Boston called Wordsworth. If you guys remember that. You know, and that was a really special experience in my life. There's hand selling books is a very particular experience. Going into a store and knowing that there are people who've read books, who curated them, who can guide you to important books that you might not have found on your own. It's sometimes hard to find a book on Amazon if you don't know what you're looking for. I mean, I think brick and mortar stores are crucial to the experience of book buying beyond Target and Walmart, even as I understand, even as I buy books at Target and Walmart when I'm in there. You know, so I think that people of color coming in and making an impact, that's critical information. And how do we get that out there? So I see, you know, I see my job, I have many hats. On the one hand, it's to amplify the voices that I think are important in our national discourse right now. On the other, and I feel like, you know, Peter, can we have weekly meetings? Can I pick your brain every week?
Yeah.
Is to think through, you know, who are who are people, again, of people of color, of different ethnicities, of different sexualities, of different feminist perspectives. Who are these buyers and how are they shopping and how are they creating the reality of book publishing through their consumer habits? I don't know if we've been thinking about that as rigorously as I'm thinking about it now post your presentation, Peter. And the same goes for you, Kelly and Jim. I mean, you should be presenting this material to every publisher in town. This is critical. I can't think of more important information that I have heard lately than what the three of you have presented in this panel.
Well, thank you. Almost left me speechless, but we have to ask a couple more questions. Before we leave you, Tanya, Kelly alluded to the fact that some books have been moved out, a lot of books have been moved out of the spring and into the fall, maybe to next year. Is there any, how concerned are you about that in terms of getting, you know, some mind share for your clients? And is there anything you can do about it?
Can I tell you my biggest fear? And I hope that this is just the fact that I'm, you know, a New Yorker and neurotic, and not because it's going to be true. My biggest fear is that there'll be a sort of frenzy buying right now. And then we're going to have books come out in fall 2021, 22, and there's going to be a glut of a certain kind of book. And that'll be used then as justification to say that certain kinds of books don't work, right? So with books being pushed back, I'm doubly concerned because it means that we're going to have a more saturated market on, you know, on top of everything else. I've had 2 books pushed back, and I agreed that they should be pushed back because I felt it would give them a better fighting chance. I'm frightened of this fall. I have a book called Glory by a couple who are increasingly famous Black photographers. They're doing beautiful. It is a feel-good book, a great holiday purchase. You know, I'm worried. It's being published by Macmillan, by St. Martin's Press. They're doing a great job. We have a huge print run. Target has taken it in. You know, it's all the right things are happening. And still, you know, when you were saying, Kelly, about this compressed selling cycle for the fourth quarter, that really put me on alert.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. We will continue to see good top line numbers, but until the publishing industry and largely the American public restabilizes themselves, unless your book is highly niched, is an child's at-home education product, potentially a DIY gardening book, and these trends are short-lived. And so I think that's the other real challenge. You know, we saw DIY spike about a month and a half ago, and we've already begun to see a quick decline in that. It's not like a coloring book trend of a couple years ago where it had about a 6-month shelf life. And so we're in a very unstable buying cycle right now, specifically just from what genres are and aren't selling. But if you've got a really good mainstream title, it could have some real challenges right now, especially if you're putting some real marketing dollars behind it, just simply because I think the buying public is highly distracted and kind of hyper-focused on certain things and not necessarily the traditional feel-good kind of reading that they do. It's still certainly happening, but if you look at some of the NPD data, you see that there is certainly some declines in some of those areas.
I think you've also got a problem with distracted media. I mean, there's a sort of a discovery bottleneck if you're relying on off-the-book page coverage for nonfiction, for example. You know, what are they going overdrive on? It's politics and COVID. And so, you know, all that extra off-the-book page space may not be available, and those staffers may be redeployed to other topics that would normally be covering things related to the book beat. So you've got the bottleneck Kelly talked about, but I think you also have the discovery bottleneck too.
That's interesting, because something you were talking about, Kelly, maybe Peter, you have an idea on it too, is, you know, the ABA has been just started, buy early campaign. I think the slogan is October is the new December or something like that. And that almost runs smack into what you were talking about, Kelly, in terms of everybody be focused on the election and post-election possibly. So, I mean, do you think this can actually work, this early buying thing, or are we really, maybe tilting at windmills on that?
Well, I think we have no choice but to put those messages out. Whether or not they're going to work fully is another story. For the last, and again, I think to one of my points, which is there's a lot of trends that were well in the works before 2020. The consumer buying public, apart from not just necessarily books, the last 4 successive Christmas buying seasons, consumers have waited longer and later, largely because of online availability and purchasing, and the rapidness of what kind of Amazon has set as the standard. I don't think we're going to have that this year. And so to the extent that we put those messages out, we have to do it. Will it work? Let's hope. Even again, if it works 5% or 10%, it's that fewer of things that we're not going to have to wait till the last minute for.
Peter, and research on holiday book buying as well, and I'd say in general, books are kind of viewed as a fill-in gift. So you got your holiday load of gifts, and you got the trophy gifts, which are the things that are really sort of heartfelt and sort of deeply considered and maybe bought well in advance. And then okay, I need a few more gifts for some nephews, or and books fill that role very, very nicely. But it tends to be more later in the cycle, which just compounds the issues you're talking about, Kelly. It's not like, oh, it's October, I'm planning that far ahead for a book buy. It's more of a, oops, I need to fill some gaps. Books are the perfect place to do that.
Yeah, one of the things I've heard lately from Chronicle and Andrews McNeil, who really depend a lot, to a certain degree at least, on impulse buying and the discoverability of their books in physical stores. And as we've seen, the move has been to online. I mean, Peter, do you have any suggestions on how you can improve the discoverability online?
Gosh, I mean, the thing is, it's so cluttered, and I don't think there have been any really major discovery breakthroughs. I mean, everybody keeps testing new inspiration engines and things like that. There's really nothing that we've been seeing lately that shows a new, fresh approach to boosting online discovery. It's just, the beauty of a physical store is you've got a very small consideration set. Online, it's millions of titles, and can you wade through it, and can you get to the right choice easily? But I'm not sure I've got any really good answers on that one.
So Kelly, what can be done to help the physical retailers as well, and the independents in particular, maybe to, give them some support so they can, provide the discoverability that people say they need?
Yeah, I do think it's a great question. I would say the answer probably does not lie on the retail side, but largely on the publisher side. And we have seen some inroads on that, so that, hopefully retail will be the beneficiary of it. And to the extent that publishers promote a localized buying experience or supportive of independence versus defaulting to large online retail is one thing. But, I have seen an increase, especially from larger publishers that have begun to more forwardly promote their authors directly into social media. And then also in the independent publishing space, I've seen really good work being done by independent publishers that are now promoting their authors who have a platform in the social media space. Again, that's not the panacea to this, but to the extent that authors, agents, and publishers take a more forward-thinking role in connecting their consumers to their content is, I think, really the larger key to this than retail trying to say, hey, we're here, we're open, come buy from us. There has to be a demand created, and it's really the content creator's responsibility to ensure that there's that knowledge base that's happening, and then hopefully they're providing the right outlets for those purchases to happen.
Anya, what do you think about that suggestion? Are your clients eager to go out there and pitch their books, or are they running into some frustrations?
Well, I'll tell you something. I've seen clients who have a larger social media presence during the last 6 months have fared better. So I think that there's a lot of truth to what you're saying, Kelly.
Yeah, I think, Tanya, especially in, some of the Black Lives Matter movement, those titles, and there were several really good independent author titles, those that succeeded, they used that to their advantage really well, and we would see immediate spikes. And so I do think this, if there was ever a time to do it, now's the time.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Okay, I see we're almost out of time. Anybody have any last thoughts on what we think might happen in the fourth quarter, or any suggestions for how we can power through?
I think Kelly covered fourth quarter pretty well. A lot of puts and takes there.
You always have a glimmer of hope, though, Peter.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. Now, I mean, as I said, people who buy books, this is who they are. They're not going to forsake what we do. They're there for the long haul. It's what they're all about. So the great news is, good times, bad times, people will continue to read and buy books. It's a very committed, very dedicated group of people. So we're lucky we have people who are book buyers that are behind us.
And I'll give Tanya the last word. I'll just add just a couple quick comments. The bounce effect, and I know, Peter, you researched this as well, that a bestseller has for other titles is there and does happen. And we will have an incredibly big selling book in November in President Obama's book. What the publishing industry, both retail and publisher, do to capitalize on that, I think is probably the final comment I would give. And so whether you're a retailer trying to assess, what you will do with an additional 15 to 20% of people that are visiting your site or going to your store because they want to buy that book, that's where the additional sales happen, whether it's there or online, or what other authors or publishers do that have comparable titles or titles of similar interest. I think is going to be a really important point to take advantage of. I think, it's been a while since we've had a really great selling title to boost our industry. So hopefully we can take advantage of that.
Yeah, that's a great point, Kelly, before I turn it over to Tanya. I mean, because it can bring people into the stores, as you suggest. Just hope they will buy a lot of other titles instead of just President Obama's book. But I'm sure it's 800 pages, and it's going to be very popular. So, Tanya, how can we end this?
I think that my ending is anecdotal. I think that right now, if I look at my friends and the people that I'm close to, we're having a crisis of truth in this country. And I think that books are one way in which people can ground themselves or reground themselves in a certain kind of reality. And so I hope that what we're going to see is that people continue to need books. And, I thought it was telling, Peter, from your codex, that the Netflix, the binge watching has gone down over the pandemic. Because I think when it first started, we were also super saturated. We couldn't take any more. Just the death, and particularly if you lived in an urban center, it was so terrifying. And I think we all turned to television, but I think there's a kind of sustenance that only a book can provide, both in terms of entertainment, but also in terms of educating ourselves. And so I hope that will continue to keep our, to keep the demand for books alive in an aggressive way.
Great. Okay, well, I think we'll have to leave it there. I'd like to thank everybody once again. I think it was a terrific panel. And this is Jim Elliott from PW, and thank you all for joining us.
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
Good job.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Nice to meet you, Tanya.
Lovely to meet all of you.
Yeah,
Yeah, thanks again.